Good morning again, and welcome to the International Plant Breeding Seminar. Sorry for technical problems. It is a pleasure today to have Guillaume Bauchet, a flax breeder with Terre. I'm sorry, Guillaume, for butchering probably your name and the name of your company, but that's what it is. Guillaume is, as I said, is a flax breeder, but he's a geneticist, agronomist, and biologist, plant biologist, and his working experience includes breeding program management, data analytics, genomics, statistical genetics, and we met with Guillaume when he was gaining some experience in cassava breeding, and I'm happy to have him as part of this seminar series. Guillaume, I'm gonna stop sharing now and give the floor to you. Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see if you put it on presentation mode.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this seminar. As you mentioned, we met a few years back when I was part of Next Gen Cassava and working with Lucas Mueller and Jean-Luc Yannick. So now back to my home country in France. I'm now a flax breeder for a farmers cooperative, Terre. And today, as you see in the title, I suggested flax breeding from past to future, adapting to a changing environment. I thought I would give you a large introduction on what is flax about these days, but starting from its historical background. Also, a quick outline. We'll go through a bit of history, how it has now become again a crop of interest in France and Europe more widely. I will tell you a bit about the company I work with, and more specifically around its breeding program. And of course, we'll talk about the current challenges and the near future challenges we are facing. So just to get you started with flax, what I thought would be good to know is, although it's a minor crop these days, it's been around for very long, actually probably one of the oldest crop in use by humans. These are two publications that were released in 2009 and last year. One is about findings that describe remainings of tissues that are actually flax fibers found in a cave in Georgia, Central Europe, Central East Europe, which depict uses by humans over 30,000 years ago. And more generally, on the right-hand side, a picture which describes the center of origin, which is likely to be the Fertile Crescent, as many crops, but also the spread of the crop over the ages. And you can see findings that were located in various parts of Europe, which are over 5,000 years old. So flax has been around, definitely. It's been around with different uses. Its name, Linum usitatissimum, is a Latin name to say of several uses, basically. And by this, we mean that there are, for that same species, different plant types, essentially two main ones, the tall one on the left-hand side and the bushy one on the right-hand side. One is being grown for fibers, as we just mentioned before. The other one is mainly grown for its seeds. Two distinct uses, two different crops, same species. This has been around, as we said, for a long time. One evidence I wanted to highlight today is what we call the biotapestry. It's an piece of art that is based in Normandy, where we are located in France. And that piece is depicting the conquest of what is today Great Britain by a tribe known as the Vikings, and who later became the Normans, who are the original population that live in Normandy from the 10th century on. And it's all made in linen, in flax fibers. So if we get closer to us, over history, flax and wool were the two largest natural fibers. And things slightly changed once the colonial period developed, where Europeans started to go across the world and discovered cotton and started to multiply the production of cotton in mostly in tropical areas in red on that map, where you can see in blue what used to be or are still today the main flax fiber production areas. For several reasons, I mentioned here the labor costs, transportation costs, which were decreasing transportation overseas, and also some technological aspects in weaving. Cotton took over the mass market for natural fibers more than a century ago now. Flax has remained of importance, but marginally compared to what is cotton today, and even more when the synthetic fibers emerged through the oil production industry. As an illustration of this, two paintings that are coming from Belgium, two Flemish painters around the beginning of the 20th century, depicting the manual harvest, as shown by Carlos earlier in the video. And one specific process of flax, which is the retting process, which consists in separating fibers from the woody parts of the stem through the immersion underwater of the stem for a period of time, so that it facilitates separation of fibers from the woody part by degrading the cyments with the pectin cyments. As it's a talk at NCA2, I thought I looked a bit what was about flax, fiber flax in the US. It was produced mainly in Oregon, which has a very similar climate to Normandy, which makes a lot of sense in the early days of the 20th century. But for a similar reason, production progressively disappeared for the labor cost and competitiveness with other fibers. Flax more widely as an interesting history as well in the scientific side, where two seminal papers could be found, one identifying cytoplasmic male sterility by Bateson in 1911. So one major discovery, and another one for pathologists, which was the identification of gene-for-gene interaction for the flax rust by Flor in 1955. So not only it's been around for a while, but also it was studied quite well early on. So more generally, flax is what we call a bast fiber. Bast fibers are fibers that are initiated from phloems tissue, so the external tissue of the stem. And within that group of bast fibers, you can also include hemp, but also rami and jute. These and other crops form a group which is distinct from what is cotton, because cotton is a fiber which originates from the flower part. So two distinct type of fibers with distinct properties. Among those distinct properties, one is the length of the fibers, and also their structure, their ability of to resist to the constraint, and which makes them an interesting raw material for polymers, composite technical equipments, for example. We'll talk about it later. In the case of flax, another specificity is its short crop cycle. We talk here about 110 days, so it's mostly of a spring crop. Today, the market is divided into two groups. So we talked about linseed. These days, linseed is mostly grown in Russia, Kazakhstan, Canada, China, and India. It's a marginal crop with specific use for animal feed and human feed, but also some industrial applications such as paint coatings, for example. And one of its main specificity, it's high content in alpha-linolenic fatty acids. As you can see here, naturally, the flaxseed contains up to 60% of omega-3, which is the highest rate among cultivated crops known around. In the case of fiber flax, it's even more specific in terms of producing countries. As you can see, France and Belgium together make more than 80% of the global market. So it's a very small niche market. The main specs in terms of physiology and growth cycle, as we said, it's a short cycle crop. It mostly reacts to sum of temperatures. So basically, a farmer usually plans to plant 100 days after the beginning of the year, so around March, and tend to harvest another 100 days after the sowing, so usually around June, July. That corresponds to a sum of temperature, as you can see here, around 550 degrees, you usually get flower initiation, and around 1,000, you get stem maturity, where plant is ready to be pulled. That's another feature. Flax is not usually harvested by combines, fiber flax at least. You usually need a specific equipment because it gets pulled out of the ground. I think I can show you a bit more about this. So in a summary, in a nutshell, 6 main steps for a farmer from sowing, flowering, pulling, which you can see here on the right-hand side. And in conjunction with that, the seed harvesting can be performed once the plants have been pulled on the ground. They get dried, hopefully with a good weather. So managing weather uncertainty is essential here. And then you can get the rating process initiated. We saw a bit earlier that flax used to be put underwater for anaerobic degradation of the stem. It's no longer in use because of the pollution it generates and the lack of labor to do it in such a way. The modern way of cultivating it has mechanized the rating process by leaving the stem on the ground for several weeks, alternating sides of the stem by flipping it with a specific machinery, and finally harvesting it in forms of bale, as you can see on the right-hand side. So altogether, 110 days of crop cycle, to which you would usually add up to 30 to 40 days of rating process according to the weather. So a high dependence on weather condition, which we will see later as a direct implication on where you usually grow fiber flax these days. As it for what concern the linseed part, it's harvested with a regular combine, so the constraints are a little less demanding on harvesting equipment and conditions, for example. Once you're done with the rating and baling, this is just one step. As a fiber crop, you need to extract the fiber from the stem. The rating process is just here to facilitate the separation. But assuming you've done the harvesting, the rating here on the right-hand side, bottom left, you will start scutching, means separating fibers from wood in a specific factory that are usually settled next to the production areas. And following scutching, hackling would occur. Hackling is here to really sort of comb the fibers to prepare them to be used to create the yarn, the final product before going to the weaver. So it's a complex process. in Europe, where flax is, as we saw, mostly ground. It's a small crop. We said about 120,000 hectares, of which probably 50% is in Normandy. A couple of thousand jobs. Most of it goes for textile market. Most of it to Asia, but also to local production in Europe, Italy, Poland, Lithuania, Tunisia, Turkey. So several end users. There are the textile use, 80% of the volumes, but also specific innovations around composite polymers for car industry, for example. There is a certification around the flax production in Europe. It's called the Masters of Linen, and it intends to guarantee a certain standard of quality in production to the farmers and to the buyers. The features of the crop is a no irrigation crop. It has low requirements in terms of inputs, mostly P and K, low nitrogen needs. It's depending on crop rotation. We usually say flax cannot occur more than every 6 years on a rotation because of its needs, and it's a non-GM crop. The cooperative Terre has been established about 80 years ago in Normandy. It was initially an association of local farmers who intended to be self-sufficient in transforming, processing their production, and it has progressively developed into an integrated player in the fiber market. Today, we have, as we said, textile, but also we have a range of products that are going from fibers involved in the skis to speakers and other specific products such as this helmet. Recently, we participated in the construction of a sailing boat, which is partially made of flax fibers in its hull. So, as we said, the French farmers' co-op, which is Terre de Lin, has gone from just a processing factory to an integrated company, where we now have included the breeding activity in which I'm involved, the cultivation and production of the flax fibers, the seeds, and the processing of them, so sketching, hackling, valorization of chives, and composite creation. We are now a company made of about 650 stakeholders, all farmers, 350 employees, of which we have a team involved in R&D of 15%. And we are one of the largest operator in flax production in Europe. So we are based in Normandy with 6 production sites. We talked a bit about the weather conditions that are required for flax rating. In that sense, Normandy is a unique terroir because it has the good settings in terms of rain frequency and mild temperature to allow the crop to grow in good conditions. And we make about 15% of the world production. So on the map, this is the areas in Europe where flax is grown. As you can see, it ranges from Brittany to the Netherlands mostly, and we are based in Normandy, right on that bubble here. And as we said, good weather is a major asset in having a qualitative production, but also we have a type of soil which is a sandy loam soils, which are ideal for the taproot of the flax plant, which is thin, but a root which can go fairly deep in the soil. So needs a loamy soil is ideal for that growth. We mentioned that the industrial processors, which is Terre de Lin, has several factories and a number of side factories for the seed production of our varieties. and also the side production, which are polymers and composite products. And we have on the commercial side collaboration with two other local partners, and we are mostly opening the sales to Europe, but also a large part to Asia, China, and India. So now more specifically to what's my area of activity, the breeding program of the company. It was established 70 years ago, so early on, and one of the reasons of that was a need for the farmer to get varieties which would be adapted to their local environment in terms of soils, but also in terms of disease tolerance. For example, we will talk again about this. Today, we have a fairly high share of the market in terms of seeds for fiber flax. Also because we have a long-standing partnership with Lima Grain, which had in the past a flax breeding program we purchased. Altogether, we offer a broad set of varieties that combine productivity and a number of quality to limit the needs for input during the crop cycle. So 70 years ago, the flax breeding program started, and the main idea behind was to get to keep competitive that crop regarding other crops that can be involved in the rotation of the farmers. We're in an area where soils are very fertile and options are plenty. Farmers tend to grow several crops such as wheat, barley, but also potatoes, sugar beets, and canola, for example. So you have to be competitive regarding other crop, and of course you have to provide genetic gains so that there is a substantial economical gain for each farmers. The other aspect was to, of course, adapt the crop to local needs, and in that regard, there are at least two I can think of on the early days. One was tolerance to telluric diseases, and the other was the adaptation to the local climate. Today, we are a team of about 15 people, and we cover a broad range of skills from plant breeding to molecular breeding to agronomy to data analysis to farm machinery. And we are mostly involved in releasing varieties, but also in providing agronomical advices to our farmers by developing new solutions for their production. Here, I wanted to highlight a retrospective view of the genetic gain on flax. The trait I selected is a scotched fiber yield, which means that the total amount of fibers that are obtained after scotching, after the first processing step after the harvest. Here on the figure, you can see the black dots depicting the gains. And on the right-hand side, the scotch yield fiber in kilos per hectare. So with a few important steps, with major progress starting after the 60s, where mechanization of harvesting was key in changing the rating process, making it a lot simpler and a lot more uniform by leaving the stems in the field for the rating rather than bringing them to the river, which was going to be forbidden a few years later. Together with this mechanization, a number of varieties started to be released. I put a few names to illustrate what were the major improvements. The first one was Ariane in 1978. That variety brought outstanding progress in yields. Previous to that, farmers were relying mostly on imported seeds, which were mostly coming from Russia or the Netherlands. And for the first time, we obtained a local variety that was better performing than imported competitors' variety. So it was a major shift for the local industry. Another variety released in 2003 was named Drakkar, obvious reference to the Vikings, which was a very specific variety in the way it was designed in the crossing, involving most of the genetic resources that were collected by my predecessor, and making it the first very complex cross as a new variety released on the market. And more recently, the last variety you named here, Bolshoi, released in 2016, was the first variety to offer about 3 tolerance to different diseases: scorch, wilts, and powdery mildew, which made it the blockbuster, let's say, so that farmers could lower in an important way, in a major way, the amount of pesticides they would have to use during the crop cycle. To extend that genetic gain view, I just put a retrospective picture, excuse me, on the evaluation of genetic gain. I got to calculate when I just moved in. And on the y-axis, you have the Scotch fiber yield in French, richesse, and on the x-axis, the years. And then you can see we are still making slight progresses every year on that regards, which makes us quite optimistic for the future in getting more productivity per acreage for the farmers. But not only productivity matters, also quality. Fibers are very important, our key product where quality matters. According to which quality rank you get, the value of your production changes quite a bit, about 30% changes according to the highest to the lowest quality range you may get. So fiber yield, fiber quality are essential. Of course, lodging, earliness in terms of crop cycle are essential. Disease tolerance is key, especially scorch and fusarium wilt, which are telluric diseases for which there was absolutely no chemical solutions to fight with. More lately, powdery mildew has become a major threat, and we have released the first varieties with a tolerance. It's a complex disease. We will get to talk a bit more about it next slides. And the first tolerance that has come into has come of interest in the past 30 years, because we mentioned flax is a spring crop, but there was also an intent to winterize it so that we can offer a different crop cycle management. We will talk about it again in the next slides. Regarding the breeding methods per se, flax is autogamous. It's a well-domesticated crop. If I refer to, for example, cassava, it has 2 copies. It's a simple genome, about 370 megabase. It's a small genome. So the typical breeding program would work with inbred lines, and in our case, we have a recurrent pedigree selection scheme. We do evaluation of about 3 to 4 test sites according to generations. We estimate that it takes about 7 to 8 years to release a first prototype of the variety before getting into the registration process for potential commercial use. In between, we do use counter seasons to shorten cycles, so 2 cycles a year. On the right-hand side, a picture just to illustrate greenhouse where we grow our early generations and perform most of the crosses we do. All crosses are performed manually. So it's a tedious task and which takes us about a month for a number of people every year. And on the lower part of the slide, you see a picture of our nursery. It's about 100,000 rows for the early material and advanced material. As we go further in the selection, we of course reduce the amount of lines retained for potential commercial registration, and we increase the seed amount available to get ready for multiplication, so that the two processes that are operating jointly. Here, an example of the platforms we plant every year. So that was 2021. That's one part on which we have on the right-hand side early generation material tested in plots. On the left-hand side, agronomic trials where we do evaluations of several agronomical techniques or potential molecules that may help farmers to have adequate crop production. The second platform of that same year, left-hand side, the head row nursery with 1,000 of lines. On the right-hand side, advanced material and early material tested in plots. So you can distinct the fiber plots, which are the small ones, from the linseed breeding program, where we have larger plots taken. The picture was taken at the flowering stage. You can see earliness of flowering for some of the lines compared to others, for example. So back to the breeding goals. There are, as in any crop, I guess, recurrent and opportunistic traits. The recurrent traits would always be fiber yield components, so straw yield, fiber yield, scotch fiber yield. Together with that, earliness, tolerance to several diseases. In some cases, according to the year you experience in terms of weather conditions, you may have opportunistic scoring regarding, for example, drought in 2020, flax flea beetle, or in 2021, scorch, lodging, or potentially frost in some cases. Those breeding goals being defined, we have a number of varieties that have been released over time, of course. Just wanted to highlight a few examples to show the diversity of needs the farmers may request. I give you here 3 types, so 2 fiber types, the spring fiber, 2 varieties. One is named Bauchet, we talked about it. It was the first variety released with a triple tolerance. I'm sorry that the namings are in French, but basically wilt and scorch and tolerance to powdery mildew, oidium are the main features of that variety. In contrast to this, high performance variety in terms of productivity was named Elixir, which has overpassed all the current varieties in terms of yield of fibers. Alternatively, the winter breeding program has released in the past years interesting varieties which have found their market now. The winter variety Olga has shown a very good potential to frost tolerance, and thus has become the leader of its market segment for the farmers on winter flax. On that side, on the right-hand side, linseed, where I displayed the 2 varieties, Omegalin and Lion, which are respectively the variety which has the highest omega-3 content, and Lion, which has a high seed yield in the current seed trials. Closer to the methodological aspect of the breeding, Flax has a fairly conventional breeding scheme with the requirements which are similar to many other crops. To say you have to get the very clear objectives on what you want to breed for, meticulous data management, and on the top of that, operations, accurate selection criteria, phenotyping methods, and of course, top of the pyramid, the more complex analytical tools such as genomic selection and high throughput phenotyping can complete the picture. Today, all those themes are worked out in our breeding program. If I put a bit of context, I listed up here what are the different solutions we use to solve different problems. So genetic diversity is key to figure tolerance to various disease pathogens. Of course, duration can be shortened by counter-season. The use of molecular tools, which has been actively developed over the past years. Improving accuracy through various field designs and data collection methods, and improving the overall intensity by having the ability to do more crosses a year, for example, is essential. I can note here that I did my postdoc with Lucas Mueller working on breedbase, and that is fairly helpful to get those ideas in place in a real breeding program context. A bit of context on genomic resources. As many other crops, Flax has benefited of the decreasing cost of sequencing, and the first genome was released in 2012. And recently, the past 2 years, a number of new genomes were released by Russian and Chinese colleagues, and more are upcoming. Several data sets were also released, including massive resequencing of various linseed and fiber flax populations in China and Russia. On our own side, in our lab, we released a paper last year, which focuses on powdery mildew tolerance using a resequencing dataset of our own collection, and on which we have developed a number of marker resources to develop marker-assisted breeding solutions for that disease. So powder mildew is a complex one. It's probably something similar to rust in terms of architecture, gene-to-gene interaction. The first variety was released in 2016, Bauchet, showing a very good tolerance. But over the past 6 years, it has now shown weaknesses in tolerating the pathogen, demonstrating that there was either an evolution of the pathogen or other mechanisms at play. So this is a continuous work now to work on powdery mildew tolerance. New gene stacking are going on to release, hopefully soon, a new variety with a similar level of tolerance as before. Other projects have been going on. I won't list them all, but just to mention, mostly colleagues from China and Russia have been active lately on other GWAS studies. Colleagues from Canada, the breeding program of Canadian linseed has been very active in the past decade, especially Frank Yu and Sylvie Cloutier developing the first reference genome and subsequent studies on genomic selection applied to various traits, including pasmo and powder mildew itself last year. So it's been a pretty active years lately on the genomic side for Flax. So a lot of new tools appearing, a lot of new strategies developing around the world. Again, of interest in Flax research, which is, of course, encouraging for us. I wanted to close this this presentation with a future, I should say, probably near future perspective. It's probably honestly more the present than the future now. But from the 70 years of breeding, our program has developed. Where actually do we want to go? Well, I guess we want to go beyond in understanding the genetic basis of various traits we have interest for, including yield, but of course, disease tolerances, but also the crop physiology, the efficiency of the tools we work with. So in that regard, GS and GWAS are now taking their place. They are now in almost in a routine mode in crops like flax. We have the chance to have a large genetic variability available, and we work as much as we can to extract from it alleles of interest for various traits. Productive traits are, of course, key. Fiber yield, oil yield, linseed, and omega-3 are still the pillars of what farmers expect from their varieties. And last point, winter flax, which was not existing 30 years ago, it has now become a very convincing alternative to spring flax in some cases. Together with that, of course, we have multiple tools available. Integration is another big project for a breeding program like us. We need to really make sure all the parts are getting together, finding the skills. The team we have has various skills, but new skills are now required in various fields. Just to say the least, high throughput phenotyping, for example, or some data analysis methods may require new skills. So being integrative on both data sides and employees' competencies is essential. And I wanted to finish with the real world problems. One of them is climate change, of course. On the left-hand side here, it's a recent study published in 2022, displaying the number of days a year each region receives over 25 degrees. For flax, 25 degrees is the temperature limit where the plant can grow. Over that temperature, it no longer produces biomass, so it basically stops to grow. In our case, Normandy is very much located in a temperate area, and it's forecasted that in about 50 years from now, it will no longer be in such area, but in an area where we would get between 60 to 90 days a year over 20-25 degrees. So that really questions how we would handle the crop cycle of a spring crop, which lasts only about 110 days a year between March and June. The recent answer to that was mentioned a bit before. One is at least winter flax. I apologize for that slide. It's in French again, but I just want to highlight something simple here. L'un d'hiver stands for winter flax in French, and l'un printemps is spring flax. This is the average yield obtained between, on the left-hand side in 2020, the winter one, and on the right-hand side, the spring one. So what clearly tells farmers is winter crop cycling is now at least an insurance to mitigate risk when you may face a very dry year, such as 2020 was, for example. So this alternative to finding tolerance to drought is basically developing avoidance through the agronomical strategy, and it seems to pay off. Another challenge, although flax is a low input crop compared to others, it still matters. The regulation around various chemicals application that may occur in the next years. The Farm to Fork European program stands for diminishing at least by 50% the amount of chemical use by 2030. So it's a major milestone we have to face. And finding solutions around this is not easy. Tolerance to diseases is one first step, but it's not enough, of course. We have developed also several projects around that. One of them is around the seed treatments. Most of the crops have seed treatments before getting sown so that they are protected or they get some kind of boost effect for their germination. We have shifted from chemical seed treatment to thermotherapy. So it's a technology we developed with a thermoseed company, and it now fully replace chemical treatment. So all the seeds we provide to farmers are now using thermotherapy, which is basically exposure of the seeds to a steam treatment with a specific parameters to the flax seeds, and which have shown to really be efficient in cleaning seeds from their potential disease they carry, but also to have a booster effect on germination. After more than 10 years of testing, it has finally been shifted to full production for the 3 past years. And so far, everything has shown to be very positive from the farmers and from their feedback. With that, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about flax, which is a really uncommon crop, I assume. I'm very happy to say that we are opening positions in my lab, so around data management and molecular breeding applications. So I'm more than happy to get in touch for anyone who has interest. And with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Thank you. It's very, very interesting seminar. And thank you for the announcement. I imagine there's several graduate students attending this seminar, which could be interested potentially to apply. Okay. We have a few questions already in the chat, and I want to remind again the audience to keep posting questions. We'll have Guillaume answer as many as possible. Paul asks if there is a large amount of soil going through the combine when you are harvesting the seeds, since the flax is all the plant is all laying on the ground.
Can you say again?
Is there a large amount of soil going through the combine when you harvest the seeds?
Yes, it's a very good point, because it's a very particular way of harvesting the seeds. There are several methods, but the main one is on the ground, as mentioned. And we have developed a specific harvester for that activity. It's not at all the standard combine. It's a machine which has a pickup, which takes up the stems and basically roll the heads to crush the seed balls and extract the seeds themselves. And after that, there is a post-processing, which would take out most of the soil elements right away from the machine. But that's not enough. The answer is definitely yes. We still have to deal with some careful cleaning after that once seeds gets shipped to the factory. So processing is very demanding on that side. Yeah.
What are the main quality attributes, Simon Martin asks?
Quality attribute of?
Yeah, of the fiber that you're selecting for? Is that
so
lengths and
I didn't go very far on that side, but indeed, so bast fibers have specific properties. I mentioned briefly the slenderness of the flax stem, which is a ratio of height between the height and the diameter of the stem. This reflects the fact that the fibers are longer than fibers that could come, for example, from cotton. And the tensile properties, what we call the Young modulus, which is an estimate of the structure of that fiber, makes it more durable and resistant to torsions, and thus it can be incorporated in polymers to substitute, in some cases, for example, glass fiber. There are several products that do use flax fibers because it's naturally sourced and can be can replace glass fibers. Sorry. So, for example, properties are tensions and its ability to be shaped with epoxy or other type of resin and incorporated into car parts, for example. So it satisfies rigidity and structural distortion in particular uses.
Okay. A question here, is there a possibility to partner or become one of the growers? In my country, Ghana, you say that 25 degrees is the ceiling. I don't know if you can have many days in Ghana, I would say too.
Well, as far as I remember from Ghana, it's pretty hot over there.
Yeah.
I don't want to discourage anyone to work with flax. I'm happy to hear about it, but I'm not really optimistic about the Ghanaian conditions to grow it, honestly. Over 25 degrees is really a threshold where you may want to avoid.
Yeah. So Meng Yang is asking a couple of questions. How do you use phenomic tools in flax breeding, and do you consider G/E in your models, in your crop models?
So we definitely use genomic tools. We've been developing resources and knowledge over the year.
He's asking about phenomic tools.
Phenomic tools.
Phenomic tools.
Yeah, good question. So indeed, there are a lot to do on that side. So far, the main way of evaluating yield is a way we also use for production, for processing, regular processing, because it's the closest from what the farmers would get from its own field. So it's very practical. There are a lot of imaging analysis that is being developed over the last years to evaluate notably quality components of the fibers, because it was mentioned, I think we have an important part of the value which is tied together with the quality components. So tensile strength, the color, the divisibility of the fiber bundles. So all these aspects are of intention for image analysis. So there are a number of projects around taking care of that.
And G/E in your models, do you consider?
And G/E, yeah, good question. We do have G/E integration because although we are a very small cultivation area, there are very strong effects that can occur between the seashore and 100 kilometers inland, where it gets a lot drier and soil types are also quite different. Yes, we do use this.
Okay, all right. A question here is by Christopher. Is there any report about heterosis in flax? Mainly wondering because of the CMS system already mentioned and exploitation of F1 hybrids.
I also asked myself that question when I started. I'm still curious about the heterosis in flax. It is practically complex to implement a project around hybrid because of the way seed is produced mostly. That would make first this seed production design complex, and also the hybridation complex would be another technical challenge. There are a number of old publications around that. I'm still curious about it, but practically speaking, it's not something I'm actively working on. Yeah.
Okay. Representation, Guillaume, says, Brian, what sort of experimental design do you most commonly use?
Experimental design, we use most of the common ones, which would include alpha designs, RCBD, row columns, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. Are DH possibles in flax, double haploids?
Excuse me?
Double haploids? Double haploid? DH?
Oh, yeah. DH, it's also something that people have been working on quite a bit. We do not have this activity because we used to have it, honestly. It has the double haploids as an issue, and I guess it's a similar issue you may find in other crops. It may work well with some cultivars and may not work that well with other cultivars. Thus, it's a very demanding process to make it efficient in such a way you no longer have issues in picking a cultivar of your choice and not having issues making dihaploids out of it. It's complicated.
Related to that, I didn't see in your scheme you using more rapid cycling, more. I mean, you do 2 generations with the off season, but can you do like a single seed descent using growing, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 generations a year in the greenhouse? Like
that's among the topics of interest, how to better to be more efficient on that aspect. That's a very good point.
Yeah, I think it may be possible, but I don't know the requirements in terms of photo period and things like that. But we very standard to have 4 to 5 generations a year and rapidly reach homozygosity. Other question is, any attempts for gene editing in flax?
Well, on the technical side, it would be, of course, of interest. On the legal side, it's complex. The public, the consumers are very much against this idea in Europe, at least so far. So the answer is no, simply. But it's, of course, as a scientist, it's of curiosity, sure.
All right, I'm gonna just one announcement before we go to next week's announcement. It looks like we have a Festival du Lin in July 7th, 8th, 9th. It's a good opportunity to visit Guillaume.
Please come visit.
Yeah, we're gonna take that opportunity. Okay, I'm gonna take the screen from you, Guillaume, and thank you so much again for your seminar. And next week, we're going to have Alexandre Ono from Unicamp in the state of São Paulo, Brazil, talking about plant genetic diversity, integrated strategy for understanding, exploiting, and conserving it. Look forward to Alexandre's presentation. I would like to thank Brandon and Thiago for all their help in organizing this seminar. Again, the recordings for this seminar will, the link to the recording will be at the bottom of the announcement that's coming tomorrow for next week's seminar. And in any announcement next week, you scroll down to the bottom of that announcement and you will find the link to the previous seminars, okay? Thank you so much, Guillaume. It's been a great pleasure to have you with us, and look forward to next week. You guys have a nice weekend, okay?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.